Welcome, everyone. My name is Evelyn Williams, and I'm the Director of Curriculum Entities and Programs for the Center for Leadership Development and Research, and a lecturer here in Leadership and Management. So welcome, and we're so looking forward to engaging in a conversation tonight about women on boards, talking about questions around how women are gaining ground in that arena, and what are some potential barriers, and how might you position yourself to be a part of that whole business concept. This presentation is sponsored by several entities on campus, and I think you can see on the board, it's so lovely to see so many groups on campus interested in this topic. So this presentation is sponsored by the Rock Center for Corporate Governance, the Center for Ethics on campus, the GSB Women in Management, the Center for Leadership Development and Research, and the Women's Initiative Network. So thank you to all of those groups for this kind support. What I thought I'd do first is talk about the current state of things, provide you with some data and some research, mainly from my colleagues on campus. It was wonderful to have conversations with them and find out what the research is telling us right now, and use that as a platform to engage our panelists. So get us all in about the same place in terms of the research so that you'll then be able to ask questions about it. So right now, some big questions around what is the business case for diversity, and the biggest number one reason for hiring a diverse talent management team is to look at the talent pool and the changes over the last few years and the numbers of students coming out of our colleges and universities with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. Over 50% of them are women now. And so if you're a company that really wants to tap into the best talent pool, women have made significant strides in the last 10 years in terms of their educational background. Almost half of doctorate degrees are earned by women now. Close to half of the law degrees are earned by women. And roughly 46% of the paid labor force, the entire labor force, is women. 45%, again, a significant increase in the management level within large corporations, and small corporations are held by women. Another business case reason is to tap into our buying potential. In those pocketbooks is a lot of cash, and companies are starting to realize it and want to make sure that their boards and their governance and their management teams are able to tap into what will meet the needs of those consumers. So women earned, they did a survey in 2001, a study in 2001, that over $2 trillion of the income was earned by women. So we have quite a significant amount of buying power. And they represent 51%, or over half, of the overall consumer population. So not an insignificant market to pay attention to. So let's look at some of the raw numbers. Catalyst has done quite a bit of research in the last few years looking at the board seats in corporate governance and how many board seats are held by women. And what this shows is that there's been an over 50% increase in the percentage of women holding seats. But as you can see by this chart, it's still a fairly small overall percentage of the entire seats. In addition, what they also found, which is a good trend, a positive trend, is that the number of seats held by women in individual companies has typically increased. In fact, recent research looked at the Fortune 100 companies, and every single one of them had at least one woman on their board, which 10 years ago was not the case. So the trend, while it's very positive, if you look at the overall seats that women hold, is still fairly small. So our impact is still fairly small overall. But the trend is positive, which is wonderful. Women's share of board committee chairs. So these are chairs that have significant impact in what's happening within a corporation. So committees like the Nominating and Governance Committee, the Audit Committee, again have shown, Compensation Committee, have shown increases in the number of women that are present, again based on 100% of the seats, still a fairly small percentage. So one of the questions I asked my colleagues was, well, is there a link to performance? And again, Catalyst had some very interesting research. They looked at the return on equity, they looked at the return on sales, they looked on the return on investment capital for the Fortune 500 companies. And on average, the companies that had more women on the board did better in all three of those categories. Now, given our focus on research here at Stanford, I need to make sure that it's clear that there is a correlation and the research does not support causation. But there is a correlation. So what do we have solid research on to demonstrate? And that is, if you look at the newcomer research and how newcomers that are socially dissimilar can have an impact on groups and in this case boards, what the research supports is that those from socially dissimilar groups can improve the quality of decision making, and they improve it in a couple of ways. One is that they are more attended to by the old timers. They're noticed. And when you're noticed, you can have more impact and more voice. They also were more likely to get old-timers to reconsider their earlier opinions. So to provide another vehicle or impact in terms of getting people to think more clearly around decisions. So what's interesting about the demographics, though, is to look at some of the pipeline issues around women in corporations. And what Catalyst found was that 50.6% of the management positions were held by women, which would say, okay, great, we've made some strides there. Women are in management positions. But then you look at the next number, 15.6% or 15.4% of Fortune 500 corporate officers are women. And if you look at the pipeline and trajectory of normal board appointments, typically women move from, or people move from management positions to corporate officer positions to board positions. And so if we look at this as a pipeline situation, the pipeline is significantly diminished from the management level to the corporate officer level. And then it progresses as we go up and up and up within an organization. The numbers get smaller and smaller. One of the questions I posed to Charles O'Reilly is this a gender issue? Why are women not being promoted? What's the deal? And he said, well, his research suggests that it's not a gender issue, that it's really focused on perceived effort. And the example that he gave me was, if I could promote two people, and all things being equal, the difference between those two people was one person could work 80 hours and one person could work 50 hours, I would naturally promote the person who can work 80 hours. And that's what they found, was that in general, men were more willing to work the 80 hours, and in general, the women were interested in working less hours. And so if you promote based on perceived effort, which is what they found, then there are some gender inequities. So what the research is also telling us is it because women are taking different pathways? So are there different pathways that are open to women that would get them to the board? And I'd love for the panelists to talk a little bit about the effect of Sarbanes-Oxley on the opening of pathways for people of dissimilar social backgrounds, which would include gender. Because there is a trend, particularly as a marker, Sarbanes-Oxley opens up new arenas. So what the research right now shows is that the share of corporate officer roles of men and women by line and staff positions, women are certainly improving, but significantly less than men. So with this in mind, how do you position yourself? And I think that's a central question that we'll pose to the panelists is, how do you position it? Should women build more coalitions and build networks? Is that more important for women to do, to be noticed? Do they need to establish pre-meetings with significant folks in the boards to socialize, establish their ideas, establish credit before going into the decision-making meeting to, again, establish more influence? And are mentors more important? I think I often hear faculty talk about how important mentors are, but are they even more important for women to have mentors to get into a high-status position? And finally, talking to Maggie Neal about her research on minority board members' effectiveness was very enlightening. She talked about how in order to be effective on a board, what they found is that minorities need to have other experience on other boards. So that doesn't help you if you've never been on a board. But they found that minority members are much more effective if they can point to other experiences that they've had. That they're also more effective if other board members have had experience in being the minority board member. In addition, they found that the social network connection that you have to majority board members is critical. And it doesn't necessarily mean that those sponsors have to be in an advocacy role for you, an active advocacy role in the board meeting. But to the depth of relationship that you have with them, that depth indicates how strongly you can be perceived and how much strength and influence you can have on a board. So the deeper the relationship, the more impact you can have on the group. And you really don't even need the advocacy. You just need the relationship. And then they also found it very important that women bring a different experience to the board, that you have to have this competency and experience that's different to bring to the board, as opposed to, as Maggie said, you don't want to be brought onto the board because you're just the girl. Otherwise, you might as well just get the coffee. And those of you who know Maggie Neal could probably picture her saying that. So you need to have an expertise that's different than the board members to be respected and to have influence within that board. So that's what the research is showing us, and I really invite the panelists that I'll introduce in a minute to comment on that, to see if the research supports their experience, because I think that's where we learn.